And now it's a pleasure to introduce Nicole Porter as our next speaker. Nicole is Associate Professor in Architecture and Landscape at the University of Nottingham. And Nicole's work focuses on values that humans associate with nature, such things as ecological values, philosophical, symbolic, spiritual, even economic. And she looks at how these are embodied in contemporary architecture, landscape, and even policy. Nicole is going to talk about drawing the view from the window. Welcome, Nicole.
Thank you so much, Martha, and thank you very much for having me here this afternoon to talk about the view from the window and specifically drawing it. I also just want to acknowledge my co-author, Aisha Batul. You'll see some of her work in this presentation, and she's giving another presentation tomorrow for VELUX. So Aisha and myself in this presentation are telling stories. We're talking about some personal narratives and how these can be evoked through the act and the process of drawing the view from the window. And as researchers, this is an epistemological tool that we can use to reveal the qualitative aspects of everyday experience of everyday places. So to start this story, a quick prelude. Why draw? And why draw from windows in particular? Well, we can look to David Hockney, the artist, who, when he was sequestered during lockdown in France, he told the public to draw like he was doing, to look closely and to not take photographs, definitely to draw. And he emphasised this because drawing is a particular way of seeing and experiencing the world. We also saw advice from healthcare professionals who suggested that doing a number of things like taking time to notice the world around us, to do something creative, and to have daily goals were all ways of managing and coping with the very unusual feeling of being confined during the pandemic. So as well as drawing, the window itself, of course, we've just seen, plays a huge part in our health and well-being at any time, but particularly during lockdown. And within sort of popular culture around the world, we witnessed people doing things with windows, communicating, being creative, things such as messages of hope and also even pleas for help directly on windows as a way of communicating. Or the image in the bottom right there is Window Swap, a website that was set up by a couple in Singapore who wanted people to see each other's window views in real time. And we see also there is qualitative and quantitative research about how we relate to our windows during lockdown. Aisha's work that you'll see here notes, I can see my slide here. I hope you can see my slides. I'm seeing a bit of a blank screen there, but I'll keep going ahead. That in fact, Aisha's found that people were relating to their windows differently during lockdown, particularly emphasising the importance of having an external view and seeing people and nature. So now on to Act 1. This is a project that I undertook in response to lockdown, and I've titled it Artist in Residence, Drawing During Lockdown. Here you will see a selection of over 200 drawings that I created every day between March and October in 2020. And because it's a selection for this symposium, I will be presenting all of them as a book coming out next year. But for now, we're just going to see a few of them, focusing on nature, light, and people. So first of all, noticing nature over time, particularly that duration, and we'll go through the seasons here. Here I was on the 17th of March, sitting in my living room on the first floor, looking out at the street below, noticing the trees, a somewhat pensive, eerie scene with no one on the street. And little did I know, the next day, drawing the same view, but I'd be drawing it again and again for months at a time. And as someone interested in the built environment, in nature and in design, I actually started noticing my own everyday designed, built residential environment in a way I'd never seen it before. This is a very typical UK sort of silhouette of the roof, of the treescape, of the streetscape of trees, tree stumps, the sense of time that has come and gone. I noticed nature. So here, this was the day that I noticed a pair of magpies that were building a nest in the tree across the street. And we heard from research by the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds in the UK that a lot of people noticed hearing bird song, seeing nature, but they believe it's not because there were more birds, it's simply because we were at home and we were noticing them within our urban landscapes. I noticed the weather change, again from this same window day after day. So here we see a storm, a windy day. There was sun, there was rain, there was wind. Other days, I paid attention to the details. And again, there's a lot of evidence that suggests that we can enhance our well-being by just pausing and taking the time to notice the simple things, the small things. Here I'm seeing the same tree, perhaps the window open a little bit on a slightly warmer day, my neighbours across the street. Or as the weather got a bit better, as we moved from spring heading toward summer, seeing people, walk their dogs, the everyday activity of getting fresh air, of getting outdoors. And again, my continual sort of ritual now of sitting and drawing the view was a way of again, maintaining my own well-being, continuing to look closer. It wouldn't be a VELUX conference without talking about window design. So there were some instances where I did actually draw the window itself and see the frame. And in this instance, there was a really lovely juxtaposition of nature externally through some of that tree canopy and internally with a moth landing on the internal frame. And fortunately for us in England, we did have a sunny and quite warm spell at the height of lockdown. So here we see an image of the window being open and the text that I added to that underneath here saying, listening to the leaves rustle in the warm afternoon breeze. Kind of tells you about the acoustics and the kind of sensory experience of having that window open on a warm summer's day. I'm not sure how that might have affected the prevalence of the virus. I'm certainly hoping the virus wasn't in my home at that time. Again, noticing details, so I'm hoping you might be seeing the same trees, the same details, but here zooming in on some of the sort of almost a vision of hope of some new life emerging from the tree trunk. Or again, birds arriving in my urban landscape, drawing a tree, but then, and rather spontaneously, a whole flock of jackdaws descended on the rooftop. So I changed what I was drawing, went from the tree to the birds. And as well as that spontaneity, this whole process of looking again and again involved a lot of repetition. So here again, the title of this work, which was in August, Another Sunday, tells you that perhaps I was getting a little bit bored at times of being at home and looking through this same window. But what I would say is that in fact, every day is different. When we're looking at nature, when we've got light, we've got weather, we've got people, we've got nature, it is always dynamic and always moving, even if that window stays the same. So here, autumn inevitably came. The trees went a beautiful shade of red. I sought to capture that. I was also drawing at night. We're talking about daylight in this session, but there were also some night views and some amazing effects you get of light when you see street lights, glazing, water on the glass. And a final drawing looking at nature here toward the end of summer. We're moving into autumn and the last of the leaves on those trees in October. So now on to the second theme, and appropriately we're going to talk about light next. So this is a northwest facing window, so as you would expect, no light coming in the morning, but in the morning the view I had did show shadows cast on the brick wall or on the street opposite. As the days got longer from spring through to summer, some of that sun came around the street and was coming in through this window. So here's an image of glare, and I know you'll be looking at glare and controlling it later today. I marvelled in looking at the sunset late in the day. Here you see that even at 10:30 at night, the last of the gloaming coming in late May. Or in the height of summer, the sun penetrating deep into the room and in fact casting the shadow of the window on the living room wall opposite. And I just want to share one particular story with this rather enigmatic image. This occurred on the summer solstice, the longest day of the year when we calculate the maximum amount of light we can receive through windows. And when I sat down, I sat on a rug on my living room floor, shut my eyes, felt the sun come through the window, and just took a moment to really soak in that radiant, luminous warmth. And when I opened my eyes, picked up my sketchbook to draw my drawing from the window that day, I looked, and actually what I felt was that warmth from the window. So this drawing was an attempt to try to capture something of that view with the eyes shut. The next day, I drew the plant on the coffee table, light streaming through, illuminating those veins in the leaves. Of course, that lovely weather didn't last. It is England after all. There were days when it was stormy, when there were raindrops on the glass, rain and wind on that glazing. And of course, it wouldn't be a west-facing window without a sunset or two. So from looking at light, I now want to briefly look at watching people. And I would say this is one of the key things that I learnt from looking again and again, was to notice the everyday rhythms, my neighbours, strangers coming and going, doing the washing, sitting, watching each other, just having a chat, really. Really important during a time of social isolation, of course, during COVID. I saw my neighbours gather. I saw the window cleaner talk to people through the open window while he was cleaning the glazing. Again, neighbours stopping for an evening chat, or even getting together and having a socially distanced party in May. How important that my neighbours had a shared garden that they could get together in. There were less positive moments, so I did see an ambulance arrive a couple of times on my street, a reminder of the seriousness of what was going on. But again, it's really important, I think, for everybody's well-being, whether good or bad, to have that connection to the outside world, to see people, to see what's going on. So here in this later drawing, I see my neighbours again gathering, people walking by. So having a view from the window, even if it's just seeing someone sitting alone, a familiar face. And again, enjoying a moment sitting in the sun. A final view from my own project, a view from the window, in fact, includes a reflection. So, of course, when we have interior lights illuminated, late at night, when I went to draw here, I actually saw myself, became a bit of a mirror image. And I would say that as well as learning about the view and about the window and time and change, I did learn a bit about myself and my own moods, my own well-being, and the importance of taking some time out through this process. So in summary, here is the view that you've been seeing. I just want to reiterate, noticing nature, revealing light, and watching people, and also then sharing what we've learned. And this leads me to the next project. So from Artist in Residence, a one-person experiment, with my colleague, Dr. Aisha Batul, who you'll see in the Q&A soon, we decided to collaborate and run some workshops with design students and practitioners to get them to draw views from their windows as well. And as you can see in the title here, our emphasis was to draw for well-being during lockdown. We ran 3 workshops over in the UK, in Turkey, and again with students in the UK. These were in December through to March, and in each workshop, I first gave a long presentation of all my drawings. We had discussions, and then I invited the students and designers to go away to sort of do the same thing, draw a view from a window, and then we came back for a follow-up online workshop to talk about them and have discussions. So here's just really a snapshot again of some of the key things that we found and that were shared. The first theme is that the people that were drawing from their windows really did value, like myself, valued the living, sort of dynamic and ephemeral qualities of the view from the window. So here we see one of the participants drawing trees, people, and a wonderful view of windows illuminated in the evening light. We saw people looking over the fence at their neighbours. So here in suburban UK, there were some lovely stories about the anticipation of spring coming. And then later in another workshop, a street tree actually revealing spring. We saw people noticing people, their neighbours coming and going, watching over families, so a pair of glazed patio doors looking out onto a backyard, being able to watch children play while you're indoors. You know, very simple, everyday things we might even take for granted. Or taking for granted just seeing those familiar routines of a neighbour coming and having a cigarette on the balcony at the apartment opposite. This participant spoke about getting up in the morning, seeing the sunrise and finding it so beautiful that she couldn't resist getting her pens and paper out and drawing the view for that day at that very moment. Again, a spontaneous response to the view and really revelling in it. We saw changes in weather. We saw snow in Turkey and this great approach to drawing it in black and white. We saw a participant on the Thames drawing this amazing view of light being cast and reflected off a building onto the water. And she spoke really eloquently of how every day she drew the same river and the same view, she noticed something different. We saw people also framing the view, sometimes paying attention to the window sill, the interior and exterior interface. So here we see the sort of framed views of distant landscapes, compared with this participant who had a very constricted view through a kitchen window looking at a brick wall. And you can imagine during our conversations and workshops, these were really talking points about, even the maintenance of a window when you stop and look carefully at the frame. Or this participant who actually didn't look from the same window but went around her home and each day drew a different view. So we get this sense of the intimacy of a bedroom window perhaps compared to a larger shared living space. And the final theme that my participants really revelled in were just those everyday details, the shadows, the people on the street. And these also elicited some critiques of our urban environment when people sort of noticed things that weren't working, like, oh, there's people go and park on the street outside my window when they're on the footpath. Or just everyday kind of suburban landscapes and what is seen from windows here. So in conclusion, here are a few word clouds that show what people in these workshops actually told us about the experience. Not just what they noticed, but how they felt. And they really found it a calming, relaxing, as well as sometimes, challenging experience to look and draw. But I think what we can learn from these methods and from my own experience is that noticing window views closely and critically through drawing can really elicit some fascinating insights into the qualities of place and of what we notice and what we value. That selective imagery doesn't capture everything, but that's really part of its value. That when we get in workshops, it can really prompt some fascinating discussions, particularly amongst designers. You think about learning about these things as designers. And that finally, it's a way of researching and working that can cultivate well-being through noticing things really carefully. Now, I have a couple more drawings. Do I have time to present them? Very quickly. Just remember, when you see nature from the window, not all nature is great. This is the lonely, withered, small tree that this person spoke about. Let's think about the quality of nature, not just whether it's absent or present. Here is a very simple drawing of a bird feeder, and the author here spoke so vividly about watching squirrels and things over the course of the pandemic. So the quality of the drawing wasn't as important as the narrative and the process of looking and talking. And my final view, again, of my window, I invite you all to look from your windows, to take that time to notice, and you may be really surprised what you see and what you find.